So I'm Sasha Strong. Here's my contact info. Feel free to get in touch. This is about cultural awareness in working with non-binary and genderqueer people. And basically what I have in this presentation as it's laid out is some Trans 101 stuff, in case people need that. And then talking a general orientation to non-binary and genderqueer identities, and then some specific recommendations for counselors to work with non-binary and genderqueer folks. Okay, ready? Okay, away we go. So, the agenda is to talk about what gender is in general, right? So sort of a Trans 101, gender analysis 101 thing. Then to talk about non-binary, genderqueer genders specifically, and some examples of ways that people do that. And then finally to come to this topic of culturally aware counseling for non-binary and genderqueer people. I think it's important to have some background in the prior two before getting to the third, because otherwise it just doesn't make any sense. Okay? Seem reasonable? Great. Or if it seems unreasonable, that's great too. We'll do it together. Okay. So the question arises, actually, what is gender? You know, is it the water that we swim in? Is it a pink box or a blue box that we were given at birth that gave us our toolkit for life? Is it a system of interlocking oppression and socialization and erasure of awareness, for example? So Butler argues actually that there's no such thing as gender identity, or even as gender expression, but that all gender is a performance. We all do drag. Like right now, we're all wearing drag because we're all dressed in some way to express some gendered ideal. Our body vocabulary and our tonality, the ways that we use space and voice and power, and all of these other things about how we've been socialized to be in the world are performances, certain kinds of performances that we've trained in. The nice thing about performances is you rehearse, and then you can expand your repertoire, and then you can do another different kind of dance. You know, if you're trained in modern dance, you can do jazz or salsa or just shake your booty or whatever it is that you like to do. So we all have options. And I think that Butlerian critique is actually a really interesting one. And in many ways, it's actually embedded within this, although I don't talk about it explicitly. Judith Butler's work is monumental and groundbreaking and very, very queer indeed. Okay? So the received model of gender looks something like this. We have a box over here and a box over here, and never the twain shall meet, except in bed in heavenly matrimony, or whatever, right? And as part of the received model, we have these ideas about what it means to be this dress-wearing person and what it means to be this person who isn't wearing anything at all, or maybe pants that you just can't see the hemline of, okay? So, dresses and pants, right? Like somehow this is the thing in our culture for meaning these are two regulated spaces where only certain kinds of people are allowed to poop in a hole. Okay? Right. So only this kind of person with this kind of parts over here and this kind of person and this kind of parts over here. Not only do they have to wear these kinds of clothes, but they have to like shopping or trucks. Right? That's the thing. Men like trucks and guns and fishing, and women like shopping and children and frilly things and colors. Okay. And then in the received model, ladies like to feel, but men like to know. You got to know how to get to where you're going, but you're not allowed to have feelings, right? And you can feel anything, but you have to. It's threatening to know. Does this make sense in this bifurcated situation? Women cry and men get angry. It's a very stereotypical model, but that we've been socialized into. Women submit and men dominate. In this received model, there's a top and bottom thing in all social activities. This ain't just in bed, right? It's the whole scene. And women have an innie and men have an outie. Right? So to critique it, we have an enriched model here today, where each of us is a fabulous gender unicorn. We actually each have a unique position and expression and identity in play, and it's composed of many things. As many things as you want, actually. And here are some that you might want to include in your unicornhood. Some of the fun gender options of identity, expression / performance, right? Your assigned sex, meaning what the parts at birth made them put a certain letter on your birth certificate about. And maybe a surgical intervention for some people, right? Who you're attracted to physically, who you're attracted to affectively or romantically, or bromantically, or however you identify with that. So it's not just these people want to sleep with these people in these situations and wear these kinds of clothes and like these kind of things. Like actually, we can do all these things. We got lots of options. And this is just 5 of many, many options. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But so here, this gender unicorn, on the left you see the little rainbow for who they think they are, and their little green dotty thing for how they do who they are in the world, right, in a visible way. This is their chromosomal genitalia thing, which is another complicated issue, but we can just say assigned sex at birth, who they're physically attracted to and who they're emotionally attracted to, with these little interlocking hearts. So, for example, a person could identify as a female type person, a male type person, or an other type person. And most of what we're going to be talking about later on in this one is the other category, the third column. In terms of gender expression, same kind of deal. Feminine gender expression, masculine expression, other expression. And in a few slides, we'll explode this and say, like, there's so many other genders than just these 2 boxes, or these 2 plus another box. So many, okay? Assigned sex at birth. Most people get assigned into female and male, and then some people are born with other kinds of parts, right? And then people can be physically attracted to all sorts of folks, and they can be emotionally attracted to all sorts of folks. And some people kind of mix and match these all over the place, right? And then this gender unicorn thing was created by Teaser, and it's cool, so if you want to learn more, you can go here. And some people have used this as a worksheet and put dots on this thing, and some people have just scribbled all over it and then just done their fabulous drag. I leave it to you to choose what you like to do. And here's some more gender options from the Yay Gender page. This is a website that will generate a Hello My Gender Is tag that you can put on your website. And gender is just one of the many, many boxes on this webpage that you can check, and then it'll spit out a nice HTMLified thing for you. So these are all gender words that some people have used to describe themselves. They go way beyond the 2 or 3 box model. You can choose as many as you want. They don't have to stay the same throughout life. Maybe this week you're this way, that week you're that way. It's totally fine. There's a vast field of play, and part of working with one's clinical skill is appreciating the subtlety of one's own gender identity and understanding how other people have other kinds of yum, and just seeing how you can relate to that. All right? Any questions so far? I get a little overwhelmed when I look at this list.
It doesn't have Two-Spirit on there.
Well, to tell you the truth, the reason it doesn't have Two-Spirit on there is that the list actually goes down to like this, and it wouldn't fit on the slide.
Gotcha. That's good.
Yeah. You'll see it leaps from princess right up to static gendered, and there are all these P's and Q's and R's in there.
Gotcha.
So go check it out. There's the link if you want. Okay.
You can't put everyone in a box.
Yeah, more genders than fit on the slide. All right. All right. So the next segment is, what is genderqueer and non-binary identity? Another good question. Any ideas so far about any of that?
Something about it has like fluidity.
Yeah, fluidity can be part of it. Totally. What else? Any other notions? Well, there's something in the non-binary that points to something, right? Like other than, oh, it ain't a binary thing, right? Yeah, and there's something about queer as like beyond norms, and then linking that up with gender somehow. And there's lots more words than just genderqueer and non-binary that might be connected in some way. I just chose them because they're some of the big ones. But basically, folks like us, like me and my friends and other folks who've, identify or connect with these words in some way, don't fit into the male or female gender box. Okay, we don't want to, and that's actually not a problem. There's actually something really good about that, and it's not a clinical problem that needs to be solved, but it can be something that it's helpful to have help in relating to, right? Because it can be hard to fit into a gender binarizing society. Like the whole, this is changing, and I think that Portland is actually at the cutting edge of this, but the whole society is set up to slot you into these boxes and sort you and tell you need to look prettier and be skinny, or tell you need to be tougher and have more guns or facial hair or whatever, right? And if you're not in any of those locations, it can be really confusing. It can be really confusing. And a lot of what folks like me and us actually want is just to be visible, understood, and accepted. Which in a certain sense isn't that hard, but people are constantly projecting these binary categories on people and automatically sorting them without asking them about it, right? So part of the thing that makes this identity hard is that you're not visible, you're not understood, and you're not accepted the way that people who identify in a cis way, to some degree, automatically are. They get free entry into a whole socialized world of a certain kind of privilege of belonging to these classes. And the transition process, the gender transition process for non-binary and genderqueer folks presents its own challenges. It's complex in a particular way that's different from either cisgendered life transition processes, right? Because cisgendered people also go through gender transitions. You become a boy and then an adolescent and a young man and a father and a grandfather and an elder, right? And women, go from girls to teenage girls to young women to mothers to grandmothers and then elder women. And those are two different gender transition paths that actually are lifetime gender transitions. They're really different gender roles and the expectations are different. And non-binary and genderqueer transition happens throughout life. And it's complicated in these other ways too, because there aren't those locations or those reference points in the mainstream culture. And on top of that, people's gender identity, expression, performance, and how they want to be in the world can change in addition to and beyond their life transitions. So it's extra special sauce. Okay. And here are some words that some NBGQ folks use or can relate to, right? Just because a word is here doesn't mean it's necessarily non-binary or genderqueer. I'm not trying to appropriate anybody's words, and this is part of the semantic field that people use in terms of locating themselves. So there might be words you've seen up here before, like gender fluid is a word that you mentioned, Heather, and two-spirit is another word that you mentioned, right? And there are other things like pangender and fourth gender and agender that folks might be less familiar with. And you can parse it out, and you can go to agender and look them all up, and you can search for these things on Google and learn way more about the multiple intersecting fractal rainbow of gender possibilities that exist for humans, and many more, right? Okay. And a note on words is that words do not define, limit, or contain who we are, right? So rather than choose an identity and stick with it, as you can do in a kind of a cisgender world, words around this provide traction for communicating. They provide a location and a reference point for talking to other people. This is a Kate Bornstein quote. Sometimes we want to connect with another or others, and sometimes we do whatever we can to avoid connection. Names, labels, and identities of all sorts establish traction between or among members of a gender or sexuality-based relationship. A key component to sexuality is attraction, which happily includes the word traction. So basically the notion is just, in order to relate to other people, it's helpful to have language to understand what the hell you're talking about. In a man-woman binary system, with all of these weird codes, you can be like, oh, hey, that's the kind of person that I want to get with because of blah, and then they see you and they're like, hey, blah, and it's a hetero-cis thing, and you're like, oh, well, of course we might be attracted to each other, maybe we could talk and do our weird cis-het gender dance. But with genderqueer, non-binary people, having language to talk about who you are is helpful both for you and for understanding how to relate to partners and to community, because it gives you words to articulate your experience and figure out where the hell you are on the map. For me, before getting this kind of language, I was totally lost. Even though, looking back now, I could say, oh, I've had some kind of non-cis, non-hetero, non-normative gender and sexuality thing my whole life. But I've only been getting words for it for like the last 5 years or so, right? I'm 36. So when I was 31, I started to be able to negotiate this somewhat, right? It's amazing that it would take that long. I actually have this folder from my first, it has my old name all covered up. Because I don't feel like spreading my dead name around. But this was 2013 when I went to my first clinical gender training conference, right? That's when I first started having words for this. So for me, going through the clinical route actually opened me up to a whole other way of understanding myself. So, not to create more problems for you, but they're wonderful problems to have if it goes that way. All right. So, moreover, there's more than one way to be non-binary or genderqueer. There are at least as many genders as there are people in the world. at any given point in time, right? Like the way that you do your gender tomorrow might be different from how you do today. I especially hope so after this talk. I hope that for you. And that could be a fun, exciting thing, right? And it's certainly different than it was 10 years ago. Right? The way you do your gender is different from it was 10 years ago. And for anybody, especially anybody with a non-binary genderqueer thing, it's an open game. It's an open playing field, right? Because we don't have those reference points, so we got to make it up ourselves. So it's an interesting thing. So here are some pictures and examples of people doing their gender. And basically I searched on Google to find these things, and then I sorted, well, and why am I the arbiter? Whatever, I'm the good enough arbiter for these purposes. I made sure that it wasn't intersex people who somebody labeled as genderqueer. I tried to have a kind of a representation of ages and readable ethnic identities as I read them, and I tried to have some diversity in terms of what I read the person's birth assignment to be, and some of their expression to kind of have a little bit of a kind of global thing. I didn't find a lot of folks with a readable disability status. I looked and I just had a hard time. So I'm sorry for that. But I would like to represent those folks too. So the slides are just going to happen. I click once and then it goes. So here's some people. Okay. Fabulous. So many fabulous outfits. This is one person doing the same drag from different angles. Yeah. Yeah. Right? And here's the same person taking pictures of themselves. Right? Yeah. It's a little hard with this particular projector on the screen because the color is not as rich as it is on the screen. But the basic point is there's so many options and so many ways to do it. That was pretty fast, huh? Mm-hmm. It was hard because I looked at it 10 times while I was putting it together. So I'm like, this is too slow, blah, blah, blah. But I could find you these links or there are references to them later on. But did that at least say, oh yeah, different people doing different things, and that makes sense? Yeah. If you just look on the internets and find and type in genderqueer on Google Images, you'll be like, huh, so many ways to do it. Or just walk around this town. Good God. All right. All right. So the message I want to deliver about non-binary genderqueer folks and this received model is basically this one. Okay. This is how we like to do it. This is how we're going to do it. Okay. So the jam with us is that we do our gender however we want to do it. And you should too. I would like for you to have that option or feel more freedom, because life is so much more fun than just fitting into one box or the other. And if you like that box, that's cool. That's cool. I don't mean to say that that's a bad box to be in. And to have the freedom to have other options is a wonderful option. Okay? Because it's just a performance. It's just a game. Okay, so that is the non-binary genderqueer section, and then here's the how to help clients part. So the next section is specifically about cultural awareness and counseling. Okay, it comes out of a participatory action research pilot study that we did. I started this peer support group in 2016, and the whole study used a qualitative thematic analysis method. We did some interviews with folks. We asked the co-researchers to generate data, analyze it together, and then disseminate the results in the community. Okay. And this is the flyer, the recruitment flyer for the group, a photo of it. And we met for about 6 months, and then we did this thing, and then it was summertime. And then everybody goes away for the summer. And then I tried to start it up again, and nobody showed up. And then I felt discouraged, and I was like, well, whatever, I'll just do other things. Okay. And then this qual study happened as the last thing that we did, and it wasn't particularly my idea to do it in getting it started. I was just looking for community. But then I was like, hey, let's do this thing. So this part of the presentation is basically the results of that study that we did. Okay. And so I emailed the folks that had been in the group, and we also got in touch with some of our friends who were in this location. And eventually 7 people participated, and they either they met in the meeting space we were using, which was actually my therapy office over here. I rented another space, and then later on we moved to my office. And then We also met in the community, like we would interview people at their house, or I went out for coffee with a friend and talked to them. And then we conducted interviews, and we also held these 2 focus groups where we generated data. And then we did this thematic analysis, qualitative research process. So it was a participatory action research study, in that the aim was to get therapists to give us better therapy, right? And it was participatory because it was the group doing it and analyzing it and then presenting it, right? And it was qualitative in that the data was qualitative from interviews, and we used qualitative methods. Okay. We ended up with 62 unique pieces of data, and then we wrote them down on index cards, and then memoed them, and then analyzed them into themes. We wrote a research report, and then we presented our findings at Gender Odyssey Pro 2017. And another person from the group, Sagan, has done some presentations with PFLAG. And so here's a picture of me and Sagan at GoPro 2017, doing our smiley thing. At that presentation, there were 75 therapists, mostly from the Pacific Northwest, but I think maybe from elsewhere too. And we had a lot of fun presenting and learning, attending other workshops at the conference. It was a pretty cool opportunity. And then this is a slide of the cards, and they're all in here. This is the data that we actually put together from the group. And then here's another slide with more of these cards, and you'll see like some of these cards are the title cards for some of these things, and here's sort of a gender unicorning kind of a thing, right? So this is our actual data. So this is a thing also to say that therapists can do qualitative research pretty easily. Like, it's actually not outside of one's practical scope. You don't have to know a bunch of statistics. You just need to proceed in a rigorous fashion, in an orderly fashion, and document what you're doing. So it's actually something that's attainable within private practice. So just a plug for if you wanted to do research someday. And in terms of the results, basically we ended up analyzing it down to 5 themes and then 12 best practices. And these were all things that non-binary genderqueer people said that they wished they had more of in therapy, right? This is like core competencies for these folks, okay? So the first theme is validation 101, okay? And basically, NBGQ people need to be validated as they are, right? It's not about saying you should be different. It's not about saying your gender is weird. It's not about saying this is just a phase, right? It's actually saying, oh, this is interesting. You have this location. Here are some words and resources that might help you approach and understand your experience. And I'm willing and able to be here with you in making sense of this and supporting you in all of the feelings that you might go through and all of the difficulties, which can be intense as you go through understanding your own identity. Having a validating presence as a guide or in accompaniment can be really, really powerful and really, really valid and valuable for people. So validating them without telling them to choose, and indeed without telling any client, without socializing any client into a particular gender identity or a particular set of norms, right? And we do these in subtle ways to perfect strangers all the time without knowing it, right? Like commenting on the way that someone dresses, or saying, oh, I really like your makeup or your nails or whatever, or your boots or whatever, manly, your truck, or, you know what I mean? It's interesting. These ways that we do that actually subtly reinforce a gender binary, right? So especially in the counseling context, not doing that, and indeed without any clients, some of whom might be starting to explore something or being open to something, yeah? Ready for the next theme? And let's also continue the conversation for sure. So the next one is holding space for complexity, which is a great segue because we were just talking about that, right? So non-binary and genderqueer identity and development are complex and really vary from person to person. It's a really unique and individual journey. So there's no really received model. There's no one way to do it, which is great, and it's terrifying, actually, because you got to build it all yourself. So there's a lot of freedom, and there's also a lot of there's no map. Or you have to cobble together maps from your experience and other people and what you think might be fun. Micah, I don't remember Micah. Oh, Micah doesn't publish their last name. They have this great website called genderqueer.me. They talk about non-binary transition, and they talk about these great things about non-binary transition, which is sometimes you just have to go and try something out, and then maybe it's a mistake, and then you decide to do something else because it didn't work, right? So I've changed my names, I've changed my gender marker, I told people I'm incorporating it into my professional identity. I'm doing different kinds of drag. I'm getting interested in doing different kinds of drag. So far, I mostly haven't made mistakes, but there have been a lot of feelings that have come up. And navigating the complex uniqueness of my own situation has pointed to me for the need to be able to do that as clinicians, to really support people. And I think that in this clinical, like Hakomi, somatic, mindful, experiential, humanistic approach, in those sorts of approaches, I think there's a better ground for understanding the uniqueness of the individual. And if we get lazy, it's really easy to start pigeonholing people and making assumptions. So it's about really being with the uniqueness of the person as it's unfolding and supporting them and letting them know, they can trust it, they can unfold, you'll be with them if they make mistakes. You can help them sort out the tangles as you go, I think is really helpful. And it can take many forms over time. So we need to, this is what we've been saying, hold space with the complexity and encourage and allow for gentle exploration. Like no time frame for people to figure things out. There's no schedule here. And it quite possibly just keeps unfolding. Okay. This theme is finding safe spaces. And then underneath I wrote, help clients find them. Right? We need safe spaces. And safe spaces are actually pretty hard to find because most of this culture is deeply invested in this binarizing situation. So if people can have safe spaces when they're accessing services, in their home life, when they're with friends, and when they're in the community, that goes a long way towards being able to unfold, right? Like, if you can't find that, it's really hard to be able to open to it and to explore. Makes sense. If there's fear and no safety, it's really hard to change. We get stuck in these old things. So finding ways to provide that for people and connect them to resources in the community, and also peer support is super helpful, particularly in validating the aspects of our experience that aren't understood in other gendered contexts. There are things that other non-binary, genderqueer, and associated identities understand about the complexity and particularity of our identity that other trans folks may not be able to understand. Other cis folks almost certainly won't be able to understand. And that you as a therapist may or may not be able to understand. Right? So part of it is really helping people reach out for additional kinds of community contexts that can support them in the uniqueness of this experience. Yeah. Make sense? Okay. The next theme is erasure, right? And basically, we repeatedly get erased over and over and over and over and over again. We don't get media representation, although that's changing increasingly. We get heat and sheet constantly, including by people like we thought were our friends, who we told all this about. And this happened to me recently. I have these dear friends who were in town, and they were part of this whole ceremony that I did, and they sent me beautiful things, and they started heeing me. I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with people? But anyhow, it's a habit. It's a habit that can be changed, and it's a habit that as clinicians we can change for ourselves, both in our clinical contexts and in our social contexts. We can learn not to assume that because a person dresses a certain way or their body looks a certain way, that they have a certain kind of a gender. We could and we can, and I would say we ought to do that. And over time, see how it feels. And see what effect such an attempt has on our own gender location and position and story, which is another interesting little experiment. Yeah. And it's really important for clinicians and other helping professionals to understand the pain of this erasure. Right, because there's a particular way that it feels, and given I in almost all other respects of my positionality, have a lot of privilege, right? So I don't understand, for example, what it's like to have my experience erased as a black woman. I don't understand that. So. I think erasure fits into a lot of other instances of oppression. And this gender identity is also one where a certain kind of erasure happens. And it happens on the level of language, and it happens on the level of assumptions, and it happens on the level of socialization. Right? So understanding the pain of it and not recapitulating it can be really helpful and important. Okay, so the last of the 5 themes is trauma-informed intersectionality. Some NBGQ people have trauma, but that doesn't mean that the trauma caused their gender identity. right? And NBGQ is an oppressed group, so there's social trauma that can come just with this identity, right? Like being a differently or expansively gendered person in some places means you should be worried about your life. Like in certain places, you could be worried for your life because you look different and people don't read you as fitting into one box or another. Okay, that's social trauma, right? And there can be biographical trauma. There can be all kinds of other like psychological trauma, and it intersects with this identity, but one doesn't cause the other. Right? I think that's important to understand. It's not a pathology loop, or it shouldn't be understood in that way, but they can intertwine in interesting ways or difficult ways. Okay, trauma and gender intersect in a complex way, so this issue demands sensitivity and discernment. Just to say, there's much left to discover and talk about it and find out, and really to be gentle around. Right? Create safety and encourage exploration in an easy way. Yeah. And then this is the best practices note card. Okay, so here are 12 best practices I'm going to recommend. The first is to embrace gender transition as an open-ended, lifelong process of exploration and joy for ourselves and for our clients and for everybody in our lives. That would be awesome. Right? It just keeps on going. Number 2 is to be curious about non-binary and genderqueer identity in general and your client's experience in particular. Just stay curious. Right? Good Hakomi option. Right? And anytime you think you've known and gotten to the bottom of it, you're probably wrong. But it's fun to think that way sometimes. Right? Number 3, don't use your clients for your professional education. Attend workshops like this one. Read up. There's more and more literature, blogs, websites, friends you can have, other professionals. Those are appropriate sources for professional education. Obviously, clients are experts on their own experience, but if you're working with non-binary genderqueer folks and you want to learn more, don't make them bear the brunt of that labor. Okay. Number 4, get our pronouns right, and if you mess up, apologize and move on. Work to actually do it right? And know that it might change. So if a person updates you, then say, okay. And if you mess up, don't have a cow. Don't make it about you. Don't like fall all over yourself. Just be like, oops, I'm sorry. And then apologize, move on, and then do it right. Okay? Good general trans umbrella advice. Okay. Number 5 is to appreciate the rich complexity of transness. There's so many options, so many ways to be human. And we could celebrate that. We could say, so many options. Isn't that nice? Number 6, start from within. Analyze your own gender assumptions and limitations, and indeed position. If you have a cisgender identity, pull apart what that means to you. Like actually dig through it and find out, what does it mean for you to be a woman or a man or a gender unicorn or whatever? Like what does it mean to be you, and how do you and why? And what's the pain in that, and what's the joy in that, and what are the limitations of that? Kate Bornstein's New Gender Workbook is an excellent resource in this regard. I recommend it to everyone to analyze their own gender. And you can take it at your own pace. So
it's a book or an online?
It's a book. My New Gender Workbook by Kate Bornstein, the second edition out by Routledge. Mm-hmm. Great guidebook to doing your own gender work, no matter your gender identity and position. Number 7, change your intake forms and processes to avoid binary gender assumptions. On my intake forms, there's a gender, colon, and then there's a line for people to write in whatever the hell they want. And it's long enough that they can write in something like 20 characters or more. Just make up, choose your own adventure, okay? No need for boxes, no need for assuming he, her, language, you know what I mean? I think it's important, and it really matters for helping a person in this identity to feel either welcome or excluded. And every little stroke like that is a microaggression. When you get MF'd, it feels bad. So the less we can do that, the better. Mm-hmm. Change your speech to avoid binary gender assumptions. Say things like, that person over there, or them, or you can say things like, dear friends who are gathered here today, dear colleagues, right? You ain't got a ladies and gentlemen nobody. It doesn't help. It actually just further obscures and binarizes the issue, and then makes anybody who doesn't even fit in that category a little bit nervous, like they're not even okay to be in the sentence, right? In the sentence, okay. And number 9, develop a relationship with this community that goes beyond learning from us, right? Make friends with us, attend gatherings with us, hang out. What are other examples of making a relationship with the community? I don't know. Just put yourself in locations where people who have a different kind of gender location and practice will feel comfortable and interested with you, right? Because otherwise, if you're just hanging out with people who are like you, you're never going to learn anything about people like us. Number 10, understand that trauma and non-binary and genderqueer experience co-arise and are intertwined, but one does not necessarily cause the other. It's a different issue. Number 11, develop a critical analysis of systems of oppression and intersectionality, right? Because the monolithic gender binary is an extension of, global heteropatriarchal white supremacy, ableist capitalism, right? It's a piece of the whole structure of oppression that keeps us all sorted into little boxes, separate from each other, in pain, unsure of ourselves, and constantly on the lookout. So it's easy to manipulate us and divide and conquer, right? So understanding how that instantiates in one's own experience, and then how that instantiates in one's social intercourse and discourse, it can be a key component of moving towards models of liberation and emancipatory psychologies. Okay, and it's just a good thing to do anyhow. And finally, carry forth these principles and become a non-binary genderqueer ally and activist. Okay, because you ain't gotta be a member of this group in order to appreciate, uphold, and promote the interests of this group. You can do it from any kind of position. And that's a great way, for example, to develop a relationship with the communities, to be an ally and to pitch in, throw in your weight, either in formal ways or in informal ways. I can't tell you how pleasant it is for me when I go to the grocery store and somebody doesn't give me a binary pronoun. Like, I feel like somebody's my friend. And all they're doing is normal politeness. But I feel like they've got my back, right? It's as simple as that. And it can go far beyond that. But it's a real thing, and it has a real impact. Okay. The next slide is the summary. Right? Learn more about us. Examine your own gender and undo your assumptions that binarize the world. Acknowledge you don't know anybody's gender until you ask them what their gender is. And recognize your scope of practice. And if you feel out of your league with regards to these matters or in a particular situation, refer. There are folks here in Portland who have more capacity and training and experience in working with these things. I would be happy to take referrals or to consult with people or do more training or whatever, or just chat, that's fine. And I think that there's a lot of room for being open and interested in working with folks like this, and just letting clients know like where you're really at, in terms of this stuff, because it can be really beautiful and deeply fulfilling to support people with this kind of a thing. And so long as you're doing your own learning and work outside the relationship to offer the best kind of therapy you can, that's great. And if it's like a bigger thing or it's not where you want to specialize, that's okay too. Just let people know without like making them feel ashamed or weird about it, and just say, I'm not the best person for that, but here are some other great resources. So there's a little headshot for me. Now you can get in touch. I think everybody here knows how to get in touch with me, but feel free in any of these ways to do so. And then the next slide is the last slide, and it has the references, because I always like to credit all the photos and books that I talk about. So there they are. They're all, I like to choose things that people say it's okay to share. Okay. So that's that. That's the slidey part. And then I thought it might be nice to talk more, because we got some time, if that's something that interests you. And then I also have, on this handout, I have some suggested next steps, which could be interesting to look at some point at your leisure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry to have to leave. It's really interesting.
Great to see you. I hope the next thing is a good enough thing out there. Yeah. And then I think this will make this, I don't know how to turn this thing off. Oh, more references. Okay. There we go. All right, so that's the jam. Okay.